And welcome everybody once again to a Safe Place podcast. And we've got a lovely guest on the show today, which is Diane Ivory. Hello there, Diane.
Hello.
How you doing now? Diane Ivory is a fingerprint expert with over 30 years experience with Scotland Yard, working also as a crime scene investigator. Is that correct, Diane?
Almost, yeah. I started at Scotland Yard, and I did 11 years there and then moved up to Suffolk. So I actually got 30 years total fingerprint expert and scene examination spread over the 30 years.
Okay, so the good news is, Diane, I absolutely know nothing about it. And having you on the show is really good because you can give us a bit of a breakdown or a process that's involved in trying to work out what's gone on at a crime scene and trying to put those little pieces together to find out ultimately what's happened. So talk us through that process on a day-to-day basis, Dan.
I think people think about what I do and get very excited and just assume that every job I went to was a serious major investigation, and that isn't the case. Generally, it's bread and butter works, are burglaries and thefts, etc., etc. The call would come in for whatever the crime is. People would call into the control centre and they would then contact a police officer who would go out and take the initial statements, find out what's going on, and then call for a scene examiner if they needed one.
Yes. So, and you would be that senior examiner?
Scene examiner.
Oh, scene examiner.
So the term CSI, which is the programme you see on the television, I, of course, don't watch any of it because it's all American.
Yeah.
I get it wrong. So I don't watch it. And I started so long ago, just the bill was on the television, so that's more my thing. I have spent a career being called June Ackland, who you won't even know who she is.
I do. As soon as you said it, the picture come into my mind, yeah.
That's me, June. But when I started, we were called Scenes of Crime Officers, SOCOs. Yeah. And as time has moved on with the Americans coming along and bringing in CSI, which stands for Crime Scene Investigator.
Oh, okay.
And I'm a little bit anti because we're actually examiners, crime scene examiners, and then the police investigate using what it is that we found during our examinations.
Yeah. And you said the majority of it was burglaries and robberies and things like
Bread
that.
and butter. You know, you just think in a normal street, you don't have people being murdered every day, hopefully.
No.
But
round here, maybe there's a few cases.
But you might hear of people being broken into, their cars stolen, that kind of volume crime.
Okay.
So the majority of it is horrible when it happens to you, and it has happened to me, so I speak from experience.
It's happened to me as well, so it's not a nice feeling, is it?
No, it isn't.
What's the process so when you first go to a scene? I mean, do you have the process right from the front door?
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing is that you know by the time you get there, you know what's happened because the police officer's already been there and you've got the bones of it, if you like. So you'll know, but you'll need, just say it's a burglary, someone's been broken into, you want to find out where the entry was made. So where's the point of entry? Now, it might be they've walked in through an open back door, or it might be someone's forced something open, or they smashed a window. So the evidence you're going to get right from the get-go depends on how entry has been made.
And how difficult it is because it's really a space that can't be messed with, in a sense, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Any type of messing that's going on in that space can ultimately destroy any evidence or lead you down wrong paths, in a sense, to working out what's happened.
Yeah,
so what do you do? Do you have to keep people out the way, or do they know to stay out the way?
It's really hard. Scene preservation is crucial. You don't want to contaminate the scene. Going to come up with a lovely little line here. Edmund Lockhart developed the principle of exchange principle. Every contact leaves a trace. So wherever you go, you will leave something behind, and you'll take something away with you.
Yeah, okay.
So if anyone goes in there, more people that need to go into a crime scene, they will be leaving evidence behind that I may then find. But it's legitimate to be there because somebody's just popped along and they were okay. It was legitimate access. So it's so exciting.
It is. So talk to us about some of the worst, in a sense, the worst crime scenes that you've had to be a part of, Diane.
Well, sadly, obviously, as well as the volume crime, there are major incidents as well. So, sadly, when people take their own life, I've been at several incidents, maybe where people have been found. Dog walkers find a lot of people, their dog, in the woods who've taken their own lives.
I always think that they're the ones that did it because it's always them who find it, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I always suspect the dog
That's why you're not a crime scene investigator.
It's always a dog walker, though, isn't it?
So these difficult scenes, and
and obviously, if somebody's been murdered, generally, by the time I'm there, the bereaved around them, the family won't be there by then, the police have taken them away to talk to, so I'm going into a scene that really is safe for me to go into, and I'm not having to speak with family members Whereas when I go to a burglary, I would be speaking to people who have been affected by it.
And you appeared in some episodes of Murder by the Sea, didn't you, Diane?
Yeah. There's a CBS reality show, Murder by the Sea, where I talk about scenes that have taken place. I didn't examine any of those scenes; these are mostly historic cases, but they've taken place, and I'm just talking about the evidence that was found and how it would have been retrieved and pieced together.
And what were some of those episodes discussing, Diane, in terms of?
There was one was really interesting. A young girl, she was not quite 17, and she went missing. Her body was never found, but they had enough evidence around from all the little pieces of evidence that they got talking to people. It isn't just physical trace evidence, it's talking to people. And of course, these days, what's on your phone, what's on your computer, CCTV, dash cams in cars. There's so much that can be found.
Yeah.
Back then it was a few years ago, but now there's just so much that could link, and they call it the body of evidence. Pulls together. So even sadly without a body, they would be able to put all the other bits of evidence
together. That's incredible,
together.
Isn't it? That's amazing. I mean, in your career, have you seen the improvement? Is it year by year?
Do you know, massive. When I first started, and this does make me feel it was like black and white when I started, DNA, for instance, we used to need a sizable drop of blood, for instance, to be able to get a profile from it. Now a speck of dandruff would do it.
Wow.
I'm wearing these headphones. You could swab that and my DNA will be on that.
Yeah. So how, in this day and age, in a sense, are there so many still unsolved murders, Diane, when DNA sophistication has enhanced that much?
I suspect there are, because you need to have the DNA to be able to test it.
Yeah.
So nowadays, people who are arrested for a recordable offence will have their fingerprints and DNA taken, and that will then be able to... the database will be searched for any outstanding profiles that are there, fingerprints and DNA, so it could link. So, for instance, we had in Ipswich, I was working in Suffolk, a very sad case of a serial killer called Stephen Wright. Now we're going back now to 2006, and in the lead up to Christmas, 5 young ladies were murdered, and he was found guilty on DNA evidence, but the only reason we had his DNA profile was because he had stolen £80 from his employer some while ago. So his DNA was on record. Nothing else was leading us to him.
Yeah. And it was only on one scene, one victim where he left DNA. What about on the other victims? Was there no trace of him at those other scenes?
Please don't ask me that question because I don't know the answer.
I have a theory, right, that if everybody's DNA was on the system, 1, we would commit crime less, and 2, we'd be able to catch people quicker. Do you think this is an idea that could come out one day in the future, that we legally have to, even as a baby, give our DNA to a system?
I think you're right. Whether it would work or not, I don't know. It's freedom, isn't it? And people are very... I mean, I'm very much, if you've got nothing to hide, what's the problem?
Yeah.
And of course, people talk about fingerprinting babies. Yes, babies have got fingerprints. They're from pre-birth, and they're one of the last identifiable features to disappear post-mortem. So they're there, but they're very, very tiny, babies' fingerprints. So they grow with you. They stay the same. The characteristics stay the same, but they grow. So to fingerprint young babies would be ridiculous, but taking their DNA, yes. But it's a bit like, look, we're going through the vaccine at the moment, aren't we? Are people going to be forced to have that? No, of course they can't force people to have it.
Going back to the Stephen Wright, the serial killer, because I never even heard of this guy.
Have you looked him up since I spoke to you?
No, I've not looked him up.
Okay.
I mean, could you tell us something about him? How old he was? Roughly at the time? Was he a youngish man? Or?
No, he wasn't. He was, I might be aging him now. I think he was certainly above 40. And just, it was prostitutes he was killing. And it was just an awful, awful time for the people living around the area, the red light district of Ipswich. And they were trying to get all the girls off the streets.
Yeah,
and
I remember.
Do you remember
Bring
it?
back memories for you.
It was fascinating but awful.
And also, the prostitutes still went out and worked, even though they knew this was going on. They had to continue because that's their livelihood.
That's their income. Yeah.
And what ultimately was it, Diane, that got him?
It was DNA and fibres that got him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a massive operation. I was working on the fingerprint side. I wasn't going to the scenes for that, but I know there was a lot of fibre, work to be done on it. Huge operation, and police coming in from all over, because Suffolk Police Force is actually quite small. So for them to be able to actually operate and continue with normal police work, because people don't stop committing other crimes because there's a killer on the loose. But it was an awful time, and terrible when you'd hear. There was one day when two young ladies were found on the same day in a relatively close proximity. And it was just, you get to say, what's next? Who's coming next? And who knows? I don't know if there's any more that were never found.
Do you know if has he done any interviews? Has he ever spoke about what drove him, what was going on?
He's in prison.
Yeah.
I doubt that they allow him to
speak. No.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he would have been interviewed by the police.
Because it's always fascinating to me to understand what created the mind of a serial killer. Yeah. Usually from the investigations that we've done in terms of understanding psychology, there is 90% of the time always a contributing factor in terms of trauma or abuse that a person's gone through, which shapes their mind, and then they go out and project that pain onto, for his case, which was the prostitutes, which is just, it's awful, isn't it?
Yeah, but there, as you say, there will have been something that's driven him to target those girls in particular, but I don't know what it was. He may have spoken about it, and it might be published, but I've not seen. But it was interesting because Peter Sutcliffe's recently died, hasn't he?
He has, yeah.
He got the virus and chose not to be treated at all, and maybe that was, because he knows public feeling towards him.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Karma, maybe. I worked in a prison for a year, and I had lots of side effects when I came out of the prison environment. Did you have that? Do you have seeing those bad scenes that you've come across, and even just hearing the stories, you would have had the inside knowledge of the story a bit more than the newspaper articles. How do you deal with that sort of side? I
think I'm not a hard person. I'm a big softie, but actually you have to get hard, and you have to just focus on what you're doing, and then afterwards. I've got memories of many people who I've seen. You can't get the vision out of your mind of a scene where somebody's maybe overdosed on drugs, and you can't forget that. I had a guy who was kicked to death, and then being at the post-mortem and as they counted all the ribs that were broken, that's in there. But I've just got lots of boxes in my head, and I've just kind of filed them away, and really tightly put the lid on. But obviously sometimes they're a bit see-through, so the lid's not opened as such, but I can see some things through it. Yeah. We often identify dead people by using their fingerprints. If you can't, if they're too badly visually for the families to look at. And this guy had rocked up in a river, very dead. And when you've been in the river for a long while, you're a bit bloated and grey and bashed about, and he didn't look good. You certainly wouldn't let the family see him. And when they took his socks off, it was naked but for his socks, and when they took his socks off, the skin came away, perfectly preserved footprints. So I was able to identify him from his footprints, which was great. We looked at the Missing Person Bureau, who's gone missing, who don't we know about, and then went to several people's houses and just powdered the bathroom floor and got his footprints, and were able to compare them against the prints I'd taken from the skin.
Is it a career that you chose to go into, or did you stumble into it, Diane?
I fell into it. Just fell into it. I'm so pleased I did. It's just one of those. As I said, I didn't even know what a fingerprint officer was, and then suddenly there was an advert in a national paper, trainee fingerprint officers at Scotland Yard, and I thought, that sounds pretty cool. I want to do that, and that was it. I applied for the job and went through the selection process. And got it. So, it certainly wasn't a plan. And, of course, young people come to me now and say, how do we do it? How do we get into it? And it's really difficult now. There's not many jobs. People know about it and want to do it. So, the pool's quite big for a very small amount of jobs. But I didn't need a degree for it. Nowadays, people generally would probably need to have a degree, just because it gets you further into the selection process. You tick more boxes, you get more points.
Yeah. So, for instance, you've just entered a crime scene now, right, Diane? And you're going to see if there's any fingerprints on that window. What's the powder? I'll put you on the spot here.
That's fine. I can deal with this.
Go for it.
There are many powders, but my go-to powder was always aluminium, ground up aluminium.
I love how you say my go-to powder. You don't hear that every day, do you?
But funnily enough, for shoe marks, I'd always use a black powder. So it just depends what you're going for. And you know, on a rougher surface, you might use a metallic powder. Just different depending what it is. But for a broken window, I'd still be going with aluminium.
So this aluminium, this powder, it captures or it basically moulds around this imprint. Is that correct?
Okay, so basically, your fingerprints are there, but they're not really fingerprints. They're just fingerprint patterns on your fingers.
Yes.
Is there a name of that pattern, by the way?
There's lots of different patterns. There are 9 different patterns.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, as in arches, loops, swirls, tented arches. It goes on, approximated arch, plain arch could go on. There's 9 of them.
I've got one.
But along the ridges of your fingers, and they're there for friction. They're there so that when I hold this cup, it doesn't fall out of my hand.
It's like sweat or moist.
And that's the thing. It's the sweat. So along each of the ridges, there's a sweat pore, and the sweat runs along the ridges. And when you touch something nice, clean, smooth, and shiny, you leave the sweat behind. Every contact leaves a trace.
Yeah.
So you're leaving the sweat behind. So when I come along with my lovely aluminium powder,
Your go-to powder.
my go-to powder, I'd powder that on the window, and the powder would stick to the sweat.
Yes.
And then get some lifting tape, which is just very posh sellotape. Posh.
Your go-to tape.
Go-to tape. And stick that, well, there are more tapes as well. I could go on. But generally, you'd stick the tape and then you pull that off, not like in the movies. You don't whip it off fast, just gently pull it off. And the mark will come off with it. And then you stick it onto a piece of acetate and there's your finger mark. It's not really a fingerprint, we call it a finger mark. But yeah, there are others. We have gel lifters. So for instance, if your windows weren't very clean, they are clean. But if they weren't, if they were dusty, if this was a garden shed and dusty and dirty, as I touch with my sweaty paws, instead of leaving the sweat behind, I lift the dust off. So it's almost like a reverse impression.
Okay, yeah.
And with that, I might be able to see the ridge detail in there. So I'd use a gel lifter, which is kind of like it's just gel. I don't know what it's made of, but it's a thing that you can put on and it lifts. So it's not tape as such, it's thicker, it's denser, and it takes it.
Right, this sounds a little bit dark, Diane, right? But I've always liked the idea of not of murdering somebody, but seeing if I could get away with it if I did. Right, that's a bit of a warped thought, isn't it?
No.
So one of the ways of doing that is obviously to cover up the fingerprints, gloves. Right, the next one is you said DNA. Now, it's difficult to not have dandruff come off your head, so I'd have to wear a little rain mac or something would not.
You're looking good now.
Okay, I'm getting close.
I'm okay with the dandruff.
You'll be fine. You need a full hazmat suit.
So what about saliva?
Oh, yeah, DNA and saliva.
You can get, how much saliva do you need, or can you pretty much get it from a droplet of saliva?
If you licked your hand,
Yeah.
I could swab, and there would be enough DNA on it.
Are you thinking of drooling over the body?
No, I wasn't until you just said it, and now I don't like that
you're talking.
I'll write that down.
So, Diane, going back to your situation, your experience, what was some of the most difficult things that you've had to deal with that you feel comfortable speaking about? Obviously, because it's a sensitive subject. There's people out there that have lost family members, and as you said previously, on certain parts that we can't keep in the show. Obviously, it's very vulnerable ground for people to hear.
Absolutely,
how
yeah.
they've lost somebody. But what are some of the most difficult things that you've come across and solved, helped contribute to solving?
I think the most difficult is, and I'm going to step away from murder for a minute, but just vulnerability of people. Like, I've been to an old lady, 80 years old, and she'd been burgled. So not a massive, massive crime, but to her it was massive. And like I said, I've been burgled myself. I know how traumatic that is. And the policeman had just said, "Don't touch anything. Sock will be round in the morning." So she was still sitting in her armchair, all the lights on, curtains, because she'd been told don't touch anything. Just a bit of sensibility in moving to one side things that would actually be suitable for finding finger marks and evidence on would have been a good idea.
When you say she was burgled and she was just, did she pass away in the chair?
No, she wasn't dead.
Oh, she wasn't?
No, but because the policeman had kind of frightened her about going to bed, don't touch anything, she felt she couldn't go to bed. So she spent the whole night up in her chair
That's a fate worse than death in a way, isn't it?
That's
Emotional
awful, that is.
turmoil for a whole 24
and a lot of the
hours.
time, if you've been burgled, it's that thought, are they coming back? So, and I'd say to people, and this is, I would say, generally true, unlikely. They take what they want when they arrive. They've been in once, they probably don't want to risk doing it again because people become more aware. So I would generally say if you've been burgled, very unlikely that they're going to come back for more.
That's good advice and reassurance for people out there,
I'm not
because
saying
it
they
is
won't, but it's unlikely.
highly unlikely, yeah. I mean, it is difficult, really. You don't really look into burglary as a majorly awful crime, but it really is, isn't it, in terms of how it affects people
It's really
psychologically and
traumatic.
emotionally.
And it stays with you for years. It's like it's a fear then for the next few years. Even if you move house, you'll go security mad and you'll like put alarms on. And some people don't want to go out ever because it might happen again.
Yeah,
So let's use Diane's words and that reassurance that it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen again.
yeah, highly unlikely. I was burgled myself, and funnily enough, glad that I was, because I could genuinely empathise with the people when I went to examine their house. I knew what it was like, and my thing was like, people have walked across my carpet and they've opened my drawers, and I don't know where else they've been. It was just that feeling of the intrusion of it as well. And then they take things. And of course, if they take, I don't know, if they took your microphone, you could go and replace it. If they take a little box that has been passed down 3 generations in the family, is worth nothing, but huge sentimental value, you can't get it back. And then often there's the guilt that you've let that be stolen. Well, it's not your fault, but you've just had it on display and somebody's taken it. So I think that's, it's just horrible. And then the other crimes that have been awful, anything involving children, how can you not, it's horrible. But every single time I had to be at a post-mortem, I'm very conscious that whoever that is, even if it's a criminal themselves, because obviously we would often have to be at a post-mortem of somebody who's actually not a very nice person themselves, they're still somebody's son, daughter, mother, brother, whatever. There's somebody loves them.
Yeah.
And I think you've just got to be, I was always just very mindful. And that's when we were talking about the black humour and how we would laugh about things.
It is a coping mechanism for dealing with pain,
I
isn't
think
it?
you find it, but you still have to think this is somebody's loved one. And just treat them with respect.
And it's not meant in malice, is it? I mean, I'm sure you're like a very understanding, kind, loving person, and you act very professionally. However, this humour is your defence mechanism, so you can do the job.
Yeah.
So you can do that job, because this is not a good job for any psyche to do.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
And the best thing after a post-mortem, I'd always go for a fat boy's breakfast. You need to have something. And that guy with the ribs, bless him, this can sound really awful, but I just really wanted Chinese ribs that night. I was just like, and that's really sick. I know.
You didn't have a lollipop or a cigar like Columbo or anything like that?
No, we went straight
Not
for the
like
ribs.
that. But how weird is that? But then a couple of days later, we had to do a second post-mortem. And by that time, you can imagine if you get a nice fresh piece of meat, it's red and juicy looking. And then by the time you've had it out in the fridge, it's gone a bit grey and nasty looking. And that's now how these were looking. You're like, oh, I didn't want Chinese ribs after that. I sound like an awful person.
You don't. No, you don't. You can't up what you fancy eating that night, can you?
But and of course the police themselves tried to help, but it is interesting. And I've been out of there now for 3-4 years. And I just wondered if it was the same. So I was speaking to some friends of mine that I used to work with, and saying, is it any different? Are you treated differently now with mental? Has it changed how now employers are more aware of our mental health and the importance of looking after it? And they said we're always offered counselling, but it's only really ever highlighted and we're reminded of it when there's a high-profile case. So it's almost like that. There's no consideration that a fairly minor thing might tip you over the edge. But that's for individuals. It's almost like it's only going to be if it's a big thing that's high profile. But you never know what's going to trigger someone.
No, like you said, that story to the lady sitting in the chair. Other people might not even think that's bad, but you saw that she sat there and never moved based on the what the officer said was correct in a way, wasn't it? Try not to touch anything, but he said it in the wrong way. Someone just listened to him, and that's...
Is there any training, as what Craig's saying there, obviously finding better ways of communicating? Is there any training for yourself or officers on how to communicate correctly to people that are going through some sort of crisis?
Certainly, I would hope so. But certainly for us, we would help to train the police officers. At least swore then. Just be a bit sensible when you're going out there. Don't be stupid. Think sensibly. And I always just think, imagine it's your grandmother and talk as though it was a family member. Most police at night, they're very busy. They're very, very busy people. They're undervalued by many. They're, people are not always nice to them.
No, they do get a bad image, don't they? Especially with now, if you look through the internet, there's that much going on in terms of coronavirus. And obviously that's an additional thing to the job that they never had 6 months ago, and they're walking around the streets and they've been told to tell people to wear masks and that, and they get a lot of abuse for it. So it is difficult for police officers to find that balance in between connecting with the public and doing the job at the same time.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
And there's not many of them, and that's the other thing. They call it the thin blue line. Well, it's getting thinner and thinner.
It is, yeah.
I met a police officer the other day, just in general, and I said, "How's it going?" And she said, at the beginning of the lockdown, the first one, it was lovely. On the streets, there was just the truckers out, and they were all waving and thumbs up, nice, and everyone was very supportive. And then all the marches started happening and the protest, and then suddenly they're all getting the wanker sign. It just becomes a whole different thing. And these are just police officers trying to do their best.
Yeah, they're just paid to do what they're told to do, and they try and do it in the best way. And some they don't communicate the message the best sometimes, and other times are fantastic. Some of the police officers I spoke to in the prison were fantastic humans. You wouldn't think a police officer actually cared, but to do that job, there's got to be a percentage there of caring and giving a crap about society. So just, we've definitely got to change this. We've got to polarise the opposite way. Yeah. They are the superheroes, the NHS, the prison officers, the police. They're just not wearing the capes, are they?
Absolutely.
They're just given, it's unfortunately, it's the confusion that you'd argue from the government at the minute. The government don't seem to really know what to do. They're bringing out rules, and the rules contradict with other rules that they're bringing out, and then somewhere along the line the police are trying to enforce this, and nobody really knows at the minute what the hell they're doing. So of course we're going to get frustrated at police are going to get frustrated with us, but ultimately it needs to come from the top down, doesn't it? There needs to be some clear instruction and some sort of felt reassurance that the people at the top actually know what they're doing, and I don't think there's much of that going on at the minute.
There's so many mixed messages, aren't there? That's the problem, I think, that and it changes. I mean, obviously we're about to go into another change, and I think where are we now? It's kind of like you need some sort of consistency. Although I do appreciate that the virus is changing in itself and what we're learning about what we can do from it, but I think at the moment, news of this vaccine, everyone's gone a bit, okay, we're all right now. In fact, I had an old lady, bless her heart. Again, she said, she said she was in her 80s. And she said to me, well, I'll just come along and give this to you. I said, no, you need to be staying at home. And she said, no, I did last time. She said, but it's not as bad this time, is it? It really is. It really
Everybody's
is.
just got a different perception on it, haven't they?
Yeah.
And no one's keeping their cool and calm.
No. So talk to us, Diane, about your business, and obviously that's been affected currently on the top. Tell us what it is that you do with your business.
So I, because so many people love doing CSI stuff, I deliver CSI events that give you the opportunity to be a CSI yourself. So I'd set up generally a murder scene because people like to think they're examining a murder.
I like this.
So I'd set up a murder scene and then give all the people taking part in it a lesson in how to examine that scene and look for fingerprints and compare them and look for blood spatter and all sorts of stuff that we do, fibres, hair, everything. And then once you kind of feel, okay, you know what you're doing, I'll give you all a CSI suit to dress up in. So I provided PPE before it was fashionable. Get you all dressed up and then give you a scene, a file with, this is what's happened, go and investigate it.
What made you think of this idea?
Just because I know how much people enjoy CSI, and it's a great way for people to get to work together. So there's lots of team building events. Look, I'm all for cocktail making, but some people maybe have a business where they don't want alcohol, or you've got a mixed age range, and it's something that's inclusive for everybody. So even if you've got a little quiet mouse, there'll be something that person can do. And if you've got a big bolshy person, and I say to the managers, anyone you need pushing up, anyone you need bringing down, because from your mental health thing, if you're working with somebody who's bolshy all the time, that's not helping the rest of the team.
No.
So to kind of have something where I can know the people to keep an eye on, they obviously don't know. It's only the managers that tell me. And I'll really encourage the little mice, because normally they're actually they're there.
Yeah.
And they just need to be able to feel able to speak up. So it gives them a chance.
I'm going to ask a personal question now. Is this you unable to give up the powder?
Yes, I think it is. I did say recently, if you cut me in half, there'd be a fingerprint running through me. Yeah, I just love it. And I love sharing it. I love sharing the knowledge, and I teach in schools as well. So
it's good to see how passionate you are.
I do just love it, and
that's good information.
It's a bit sad, though, isn't it?
It's not sad. I think it's fascinating. Something that I'd love to do as well. As I said, it is a fascinating subject, isn't it?
And that's the thing. That's you saying I'd love to do it, and it's really nice to give people a chance to do it, but without any of the real. I mean, there's never a body there at my murders.
Oh, you don't actually kill anybody?
No, I'm quite kind like that, yeah. At my murder, the body's already at the post-mortem, so there's nothing. There's the blood's left behind, but there's no actual body there. So, and generally people have good fun. It's just, it's good. And you said earlier on about you'd like to know how to get away with murder. I do another event, which I call How to Get Away with Murder.
Oh, do you? I'll come along.
So I kind of give people, but mainly it's top tips on why you won't get away with it. Modern science and technology is not your friend.
So it's a deterrent.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I give people the chance to come up with the perfect murder, and then I tell them exactly why it won't work.
So what I'll do is, Diane, I'll put a description at the bottom of the YouTube video to your business.
Thank you.
And where people can contact you through that. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show today.
It's been lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.